So, good evening, Edgewood. First and foremost, thank you for making the time to participate this evening. Um, this just a quick reminder: this evening came about as a direct link to the feedback that you provided to us during convocation on the experience that we had with Libby Spears. So obviously, Libby's been with us now for the second year, and she's brought us some very high quality information on how we can maintain our, for lack of a better word, just sanity these days. A lot of you wrote me very, very deep private emails about how the exercise that we participated with Libby on really helped you in a place where you were starting to maybe feel a little bit isolated from the rest of us or the rest of the world. And she gave you some real practical things that we could do every day. And so, in our commitment, my commitment to your emotional and spiritual well being, I want to make sure that we continue these conversations. There's going to be, I believe, 10 of these over the next 10 months. And so we will continue this series. I hope that you will keep talking to your friends about participating in these. We're going to be recording these and then send them out so our internal district folks can look at it. But please know that this is being done because you're important. Your well-being is important. And we can all use a little bit of help these days. And so there's nothing wrong with participating in these events. I know I've personally used this when I was in another district, and then also just I like to be very mindful of EQ or emotional intelligence, just being in contact with that inner person ourselves sometimes. And so thank you. I'm going to give it back to Olga, and in advance I'll say thank you, Libby. I will say, Edward, just so you know, I will probably roll off around 7. I was invited to be on a panel with the Spanish network, Univision. And so I'm going to need 10 minutes to sort of flip my switch and remember Spanish because I'm going to spend 90 minutes speaking Spanish. And although lo puedo hacer sin pensar, I can do it without thinking, I still need to kind of get out of my English head and go to Spanish.
So you go do that. You go do that, and I'll do this.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Libby.
Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Hernandez. So again, we will be using the chat and the Q&A feature down below. This will be recorded and will be sent out to everybody in Edgewood. So Ms. Spears, anything else before?
No, I'm going to share my screen, and we're just going to start where we left off. Honestly, I'm going to pick back up where we left off when we were together for the convocation. I do have a couple of slides. I find that it's really helpful for me just in terms of making sense of what I want to talk about. And what I wanted to do with you today, just based on the time that we spent together in convocation, is I wanted to establish a really clear foundation around what is emotional intelligence, and then give us a chance to check in with each other. I'm gonna take you through what I call ripped from the headlines situation that popped up on my Facebook today that I thought this would be a really great exercise for educators to apply the different concepts related to emotional intelligence. And so we're going to go through that together and look for ways in which we could apply emotional intelligence to something that might be challenging for you. And then as we move towards the end, we're going to reconnect back to something that we did during convocation, and that idea of power, purpose, and potential. So before I do that, I want to check in with you. Whether you're watching this live or you watch it later on your own time, I want to give you an opportunity to add a new exercise to your toolkit of emotional intelligence practices that you can use. Back when I was at the University of North Texas, we ran what was called a communication apprehension lab. It sounds really fancy. The actual laboratory itself did not reflect any fanciness whatsoever. In fact, what it was a room in Terrell Hall that was unoccupied, and we filled it with what you see here, these sort of cheap, inexpensive sun chairs. We had about 10 of them in this room, and we would identify students at the beginning of the semester who had really high levels of anxiety when it came to communicating, and then even more specifically when it came to doing public speaking. And so they were offered the opportunity to come and participate in this semester-long lab where once a week they had to come into the room, lay down on one of these chairs, and over the course of an hour, go through an exercise that I call a body check. So the idea behind it was, and this was research-based, it wasn't something that we just came up with on our own time, it was something that was research-based. The research said that when you would take a person through a very specific body check exercise, you could monitor their anxiety levels not only inside of the laboratory, but over time, participants would start to see their anxiety levels going down when they got put into situations like public speaking that in the past had caused them anxiety. So we are always adding tools. Every time that we're together each month having these conversations, we're gonna add new tools into our toolkit. You practiced a couple of exercises last time in the convocation. We went through the Wheel of Emotions exercise. We did some practice around holding space for others. And so the next tool I want you to add is just a body check exercise. So if you will, I don't know what kind of day you've had. I taught a 4-hour morning workshop on Zoom. I taught an afternoon 4-hour workshop on emotional intelligence. And so I want us to all just take a second and for about a minute, starting at the top of your head, and then we're gonna move all the way down into our toes. We're gonna move through a body check exercise. If you find that it's more helpful for you to do this with your eyes closed, I'm not watching you, I can't see you, so you can close your eyes if you want to. And we're gonna start at the top of our head. So what I want you to do is just feel your body starting at the top of your head for just a moment. See if you have any sensations, if you have any pressure, if you have any stress that you're carrying in your head. And then you're gonna work your way down into your neck. So I want you to feel your neck. You're gonna go down into your shoulders, which is where I carry a lot of my stress. I carry it in my shoulders. Now I want you to go down into your chest. Go down into your stomach, your torso, as well as your lower back. Lots of people carry their stress and anxiety in their torso. Go down into your legs. You're checking in with yourself. Go down into your feet, all the way down to your toes. And I want you to just process what's going on inside of your body. We tend to be very disconnected from our bodies. How many of you are familiar with Dr. Ken Robinson? He has the most watched TED Talk of all time. He passed away over the weekend. Completely unexpected for me and most people who don't have a relationship with him. It turns out he had cancer, and I had no idea that he was even sick. I love this man. If you've never watched his TED Talk, Do Schools Kill Creativity? It's the most watched TED Talk of all time. And one of the things that he says in that talk that I think certainly can apply to us as educators, he said academics often see their bodies as a vehicle or a system by which they can move their head from one place to another. So they're very disconnected from their own bodies. Academics and many of us who are educators, we have a tendency to live in our head. And so I want to encourage you in the days to come, the weeks to come, as we are processing through the different areas of emotional intelligence, I want to encourage you to take time in your day to stop and do a 60-second body check, starting at the top of your head, going down to your toes. And if you noticed anything, feel free if you want to add it to the chat. But that's a good way for you to start getting in touch with your body throughout the day. All right, so I'm a kid from the 70s. I watched Justice League and Super Friends every week. I wanted to be Wonder Woman so bad. She's like my hero. And so what I want you to do really quickly in the chat, just like tell me, what is your emotional intelligence superpower? So knowing what you know about EQ at this point, what would you say is one of your superpowers related to emotional intelligence? And I'll give you a second, let you think about it and add it to the chat. exit out and open my chat. Oh, Judith, intuition. I love that answer because a lot of people don't trust their intuition. We can become very disconnected from our intuition. So I love that answer. Remaining calm when others are stressed. That's a fabulous one as well. Empathy. Oh, good. You're doing body scans. Oh, I love that. Okay, so we're on the same page. I love that you're doing that as well. That's fantastic. So you can continue to type in the chat, but I want us to start from a place of feeling really powerful about our capabilities and what we already are doing well when it comes to this conversation around emotional intelligence. I think it's critical to do that because during times that are disruptive or potentially stressful, when you're feeling anxiety or frustration, it's important to remind yourself that there are a lot of things related to your EQ that you do really well. And being able to celebrate and appreciate and take note of those things, I think is a critical piece of this conversation. So I have an hour to hang out with you, right? We're gonna hang till about 7:30. And as I thought about our time together a couple of weeks ago, I thought, what do I wanna do with this time? If we're gonna hang out for an hour, how do I wanna use this time that we have together? So the first thing I wanna do is just talk about what is emotional intelligence, and we're gonna relate it to the 4 areas of emotional intelligence. We're also going to look at, as I said, a ripped from the headline scenario, and we're going to apply in real time some EQ practices to a scenario that might be challenging or could potentially create some strong emotional reactions in you. And then I've given you an activate list. So Olga, I guess everyone was given the handouts, so we're good to go there. So if you have that in front of you, you've already got it. We'll talk a little bit about it as we go along and tell you what to do with it. But ultimately, we're driving back to the same outcome that I'm going to talk about every month, and that is, how do I take this information and how do I plug it into being purposeful, feeling powerful, and expanding my potential as a leader in your district, your community, your family, your relationships. So as we go along, you're going to notice that there's 2 boxes associated with each of the 4 areas that we're going to talk about tonight. Those boxes are there intentionally. The left-hand box is for you to just add in what you'll see in the slides. The right-hand box is when you have comments, questions, things that you want to know more about. You can take note of it there if you are taking notes using that handout. So, okay, let's just start here. If we're all operating from the same understanding of this word, emotional intelligence, it's going to make our time together that much better and productive because we're working from the same playbook. So I'm going to conceptually position emotional intelligence is something that is built around 4 critical skill sets that you need to build and master in order to be a leader who has a high emotional intelligence. And I want to be very intentional with you as we get to know each other better and we spend this time together every month. I'm going to always talk about you as a leader. So whether you see yourself that way or not, I am going to talk about you as if you are a leader. And if you don't fully see yourself in that way on our call today, let's watch and see what happens month to month as we come back together. If you start to feel more like a leader as you encounter the different things we're going to talk about, if it increases your confidence and it gives you the courage to want to show up and be a leader. So in order to get there, there's 4 things we need to talk about together. So we want to begin with the degree to which you are or are not self-aware. So that's the starting point for anything related to emotional intelligence, is your level of self-awareness. The second thing is then how you manage yourself. So awareness is in your head. It's your knowing, the things that you know about yourself and understand. Self-management is the doing piece of it. It is your ability to go out into the world and to manage yourself in a way that you can show up and get the best outcomes for yourself and the people that you're in relationship with. Now, on the other side of the equation is where we start to look at you in relationship to other people. And that's where we're going to talk about things related to your social awareness. So we'll look at things like empathy. How are you in terms of your organizational adeptness? So all those things related to you, your relationships, and your awareness of those things. And then we're going to look at how you manage your relationships. So social management is how do we develop others? We're going to look at things around inspirational leadership, being someone who is a change catalyst. So you are resilient, you pivot quickly, even during times of stress and disruption, you can be a catalyst for productive and positive change. Are you influential in your relationships? Do you understand how to manage conflict? Do you do teamwork and collaboration? So together, those four things, if we thought about them as a math equation, when they all come together, what we're doing is we are creating an emotionally intelligent leader, someone who shows up with the confidence and the courage to lead themselves and others. So you'll be doing in our next month, we're actually going to do an assessment where you will be looking at yourself and then having other people assess you as well. So you can start to get some insights and understanding around what are some of your strengths related to emotional intelligence, and then what are some of the areas that you want to work on. You will also notice as we go along that we will build a list around each one of these categories to go into more depth. So I don't think I really stopped down on the left-hand side. So for just a moment, let's talk about the self-awareness. This is where we're naming our emotions. So we recognize our emotions and the effect that they have. We can do an accurate self-assessment by knowing our strengths and our limitations. And then self-confidence is also going to be correlated with self-awareness. This is your sense of self-worth around your capabilities. And then when we talk about the management piece of that, we're going to look at self-control. So when you encounter something that is challenging or difficult or frustrating, do you have the self-control to keep yourself in check so that you don't create more negative or unwanted outcomes for yourself or others? We're also going to look at transparency. Do you act according to your values? So if you profess to be have a certain value or belief, do your behaviors and the way that you interact in the world, does it line up or match? That's how we're going to operationalize transparency. We'll look at adaptability as well as achievement. Do you have the drive to improve? Do you take initiative, meaning that you're a self-starter and you can act on and make things happen? And then we will also look at optimism. So are you able to be persistent in the pursuit of your goals, even when things get hard? Even when things get hard. So this is where we can have conversations around accountability. Now, in a moment, I'm going to take you into a situation, and I love the timing on this because it happened this morning. As I was getting ready to do my morning workshop, I just kind of got on Facebook for a minute and I saw this post. And I didn't really think much about it until later in the day. I was taking a break and I looked on Facebook again and I noticed that this post had I think something like 65 comments. And this is just a personal, I wouldn't even say a friend. This is someone that I'm acquainted with. She's a director of a nonprofit here in North Texas. And so it's not someone that I have a strong interpersonal connection to. And I saw the comments and I thought, this is a really good example of what it looks like to do emotional intelligence in action. So what I want us to do together, because I don't want to just me talk for an hour and then we go back to our regularly scheduled lives. I really want us to participate with one another and work through a scenario using self-awareness management, social awareness, and social management to see what does emotional intelligence look like when it gets put into action. Okay, so in order to do that, you need to know the scenario. I know you're waiting, it's exciting, you can see it's hidden behind this circle. Oh my gosh, what is it? Is it gonna be provocative? It's not super provocative, but it is certainly timely. So this is the post. I am crying, tears are rolling, I'm losing it. I cannot do virtual homeschool, manage my work, take care of household responsibilities, and take care of myself. I am not a first grade teacher. and Frisco Virtual Learning, which is where her kid goes, wants us to be online from 9 to 11 each day. And then 7:45 to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it's constant interaction. I've reached out to a couple of friends, but I just want to put it out there to see what everyone else is doing. We're thinking we'd like to maybe find a learning pod or seeking recommendations for an in-home tutor. Okay, so the first thing I want us to do is just sit with this for a second. So everybody take a deep breath. You may have seen similar posts in your feed. And what I want us to do together is I want us to walk through how a highly emotionally intelligent leader would process and make sense of this post, okay? So in the chat, we're just gonna work through this together. So the first thing I want you to do is start with self-awareness. And in the chat, just tell me, how do you feel when you read this? And if you need, and I'll give you, look what I've got. Are you ready? Oh, okay. So if you need some of your wheel of emotion words to tap into, how do you feel when you see that post? What feelings come up for you? Add it to the chat. So we've got concerned. I feel sad and I want to help her. I feel powerless. I feel overwhelmed just as she does. Karina, I feel stressed. When I read it, I'll tell you, I felt helpless. Because I felt like I don't know, like I have no solutions for her. I don't know what the answer is, so I'm not really sure what I can contribute. So I felt sort of helpless as I read it. Dorothy, you feel empathy and concern for not only the mother, but the child who can see what the mom is feeling. Janet, I want to help. Okay. So in an emotionally intelligent response, when we encounter something that can challenge us, and I'm using the word challenge not as that we have a negative reaction to it, it challenges us because it brings up an emotional response, right? So as we are becoming more emotionally intelligent together, the first step is to name what you are feeling. So to name what you are feeling. The original definition of emotional intelligence, which was published in a 1990 article 30 years ago by two psychologists, said that emotional intelligence is being able to name and identify emotions and to use emotional information in order to make decisions. So it is making decisions based on emotions and feelings that you pick up from yourself and others. So as you're processing through a situation like this, and I'd be willing to bet that you've all encountered some variety of situation like this over the past couple of weeks from parents, maybe from family members, friends, neighbors, maybe parents in the district that you're connected to. You've probably encountered situations like this. So the first thing we always want to do in terms of raising our emotional intelligence is we want to ask ourselves, how does this make me feel? So what kinds of feelings am I having as I encounter this? Okay, so the second thing that I want you to consider is, what would I need to address for myself before I do anything? So before I take an action and I reach out, I respond, I say something, I don't say something, what would be some self-management strategies that you would want to employ? So I'm going to give you a second to think about that. So how do I self-manage? And remember, self-management is about self-control. It's about accountability. It's about staying optimistic. So what are some self-management things that we would want to address in a situation like this? By the way, as you continue to process and think about this, whether you're with me live and I'm getting to watch you in the chat, or you're doing this after the fact and listening to the recording, one of the things that I'm struck by, and in a public setting like this, it may be such that someone wouldn't want to acknowledge or own, but I'm curious, did anyone feel defensive when they read that post? So I'm curious if anyone felt any defensiveness about the post. So Dorothy, what do you mean when you say learn about my weaknesses in relation to this? What would that look like for you? And you can type it into the chat. Okay, so Marta, you're going to take some deep breaths. So you're going to go into some self-care strategies before you react. You're going to look at the different sides of the story and get perspective. You're going to brainstorm some ideas and then calm yourself so that you listen before you advise. So obviously you and I, right, this is work that you're already familiar with, because I remember you told me up in our introduction that you're doing some body checks. So we are of the same, right? So you're already practicing some of these things. And what I love in the self-management step is you start with self-care. So before we react to something, we just take a few deep breaths, or whatever self-care looks like for you. You look at the different sides of the story so that you can get perspective, and you're not just reacting to what is it's a pretty emotionally charged post. Her very first sentence is, I'm crying real tears over here, I'm losing it. And she put losing in all capital letters. So it's coming from a very vulnerable and emotional place for her. So in terms of self-management, one of the things that I want to encourage you is that you get very clear that your emotional reaction is not one that is trying to meet the level of emotional reaction of the poster. Because sometimes, particularly those of us who are very strongly inclined towards empathy, one of the self-management problems that can pop up for us during these times is that we will match her level of emotion, because we want to do empathy with her. We want to feel what she's feeling. And so we have to be careful that we don't just roll up and match her emotion, because when we do that, we often are not of service to the person who is having the problem, the struggle, or the challenge. Okay, so I want to read through a couple of other things that are in the chat, because I think this is valuable. So Janet, you're going to ask yourself, do I even have resources to offer assistance? I love that. Victoria, before you react, you're going to say, how am I handling this? So when I look at virtual learning for my child and how I'm doing it, I'm going to consider myself. Melissa, you're going to manage expectations of others and realize that you're doing your best and giving yourself grace. Melissa, if you don't mind, in the chat, this pulls something up for me that I'm curious about. Do you have a history of taking on other people's pain and problems? So do you have a history of absorbing other people's pain and problems? And the reason I'm asking is because, I don't know, I'm just sensing in your response that that might be something you have to be very clear about in the self-management piece of this is, do I have the bandwidth to respond, react, and help? Do I have the bandwidth? Marta, what about those families that don't have the means to hire a tutor or even the capacity to navigate the technology? Teresa, you're going to think about how you manage your time with every aspect of your life and organizing your schedule. Judith, you're just going to stop and pause and just send out a prayer for her. So you're just going to send something out into the universe that hopefully will make its way to her and will give her some relief. Marta, you're not negating her experience, but you go to all of the people who are having struggles that are hard as well. I love that. Melissa, I see your answer. Yep. Isn't it amazing that even through this screen, I can pick up on that just by your little response? I don't know. I just got a sense of, I wonder if Melissa has a tendency to take on other people's pain and problems. Ah ha ha. That goes into your notes. Because what we're noticing here as we work through this scenario together, and as you can tell, I'm getting really excited because I love this stuff, but what's happening is you're learning about yourself, what needs to go into my personal self-management strategies, knowing the information that I've just uncovered. So I tend to take on people's pain and problems. That's self-awareness. What I do about it, how I manage myself, that's the self-management piece. So Melissa, I love that you've revealed this. And if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you one more question and you can answer in the chat. Knowing that you have that tendency, what would be a self-management strategy that will help you to not get absorbed by this person's situation? Does that make sense? So Melissa, you said, I have to keep structure for expectations of multiple groups, my daughter, work, and being a mother. Absolutely. So prioritizing, and we're not going to do any boundary work in this week's call. It will come up later, but in self-management is learning and understanding the boundaries that I have in my relationships. Because remember, this person is just an acquaintance for me. I'm not a friend. We don't hang out. I've met her a couple of times. We've worked together once. I don't have an interpersonal bond or connection to her. I also want to make it clear, if anyone's wondering, I asked permission from her to share this. I took her name and her picture out, but I asked if I could share her words. This is exactly how she posted it. Okay, let's keep moving because we're already at 7:02 and I don't want to run out of time. I hope that you appreciate the value, though, of walking through an everyday scenario and recognizing how do we apply the EQ concepts so that we can get better outcomes. So I keep coming in and out of the share because my chat function doesn't work really well when I'm in share. Okay, so social awareness is where we can start asking questions around empathy. So do I have empathy for her? And if I'm struggling to empathize, what could I do to clear a path so that I could get to empathy? And remember, empathy does not mean I have to fix it. Empathy doesn't mean I have to make it okay. Empathy doesn't mean that I have to solve her problem for her. All empathy means is that I am willing to try to understand and imagine her situation. That's it. I'm willing to try to understand her situation. So social awareness, what does it look like for me to do empathy? And I'm curious, and I think some of you are already tapping into that piece of it, but in the chat, do you empathize? Do you struggle to empathize? And what could you do to clear a path so that you could empathize? Jim, you are so welcome. That might need to go on a t-shirt if that's something that you struggle with. If that's a struggle for you, put that sucker at least on a sticky note and put it somewhere. I don't have to fix it in order to empathize with someone. So Karina, you do empathize, but you struggle with wanting to solve their problems. I'm going to type into the chat. I'm going to give you a term. And for those of you that showed up tonight and we get to hang out, I want you to really think on this. And when we come back for our next call, just remind me. I want you to just think of this term. So we talk about these people as emotional Sherpas. So you know when you, right? You know when you climb Mount Kilimanjaro or you go to Machu Picchu, you're going to hire a Sherpa. And a Sherpa is the person that's going to carry all the luggage. Right? So they're going to have luggage on their backs, their donkey, and they're going to carry the load for you. And people who are naturally inclined towards empathy, they often have a really hard time drawing the line between empathy and taking over the problem. So I want you visually to imagine an emotional Sherpa in the weeks to come. So when you bump up against moments like this, and your natural inclination is to fix it, solve it, or make it right, I want you to go, okay, do I want to be an emotional Sherpa in this moment? Do I want to be the emotional Sherpa? And that can be something that's very liberating for you as you recognize it's not my responsibility to solve all of the problems. Okay. I worry that letting them know that I'm empathetic, they will expect additional actions on my part. I 100%, and Jim, I want to give you an answer tonight, but instead I'm going to ask you to sit with it. And when we get to boundary work, we're going to talk a little bit more about how can I extend empathy, but not overextend myself to the point that I've taken on too much. So Melissa, you immediately empathize because you've been there, but I also realize I can't always fix it. I have to be careful to not take on that responsibility. And then Olga, you have a hard time telling people no. So it looks like collectively, a lot of you are having that same response that I just want to point out to you, you don't know her name, you haven't seen her picture, you don't know what her family looks like, you don't know a thing about this person, and you're still inclined to empathy. If I showed you her picture and her kids, you'd probably be dead. You'd just be like, forget it, I'm solving this problem. Everybody I'm clearing the schedule, because just seeing this family, you would think, oh my gosh, I feel connected to this family. I want to help them. I didn't even give you any of that information, and you're still naturally inclined to empathize. Remember that. So that is something to think on as these months move on and we're building in skill sets for you to be more emotionally intelligent. Emotional intelligence is not being in a constant state of empathy for all people, all things, all situations. You have to choose where you use your energy. Okay, last but not least, and then we're going to wrap up this situation that we're in here together. The last is the social management piece. So what help can I offer? And what response do I want to give? So I want you to imagine that you're in my shoes and that you just happen upon this on social media. You see this post. What would be an appropriate social management response that comes from a highly emotionally intelligent place? So what should I do with this information? Okay, so Jim, just give some encouragement. And it's funny you say that, because when I messaged her to ask for permission, I said, the first thing I want to do is send you a virtual hug, right? I just want to send you a hug. And so offer some encouragement. Anybody else? So what would be an appropriate response? So Jamie, I'm just going to listen. Melissa, I'm going to remind her she's doing a great job and she is powerful. I love that. Janet, thank you. I'm going to acknowledge her feelings. I know this is hard. I know that you are struggling, and I'm just going to acknowledge it. I think that one is so critical. Anything else that you think would be appropriate in this last piece of the equation? I'm going to reach out to the school. She can't be the only person that's feeling that way. So yeah, if you're in a position of influence, and that's where we go back to the original conceptualization of social management. A lot of social management is about our ability to influence and persuade others within our networks. And so if you are in a position to potentially help, and you have the bandwidth to do that and you feel invested, then yeah, you could absolutely do that. Teresa, I'd let her know she's not the only one. And as professionals, we are struggling as well. I think that is critical too. I think that helping them understand that this is hard for all of us is something that would be a really lovely response. Judith, I would remind her that she's had difficulties before and that she will be okay. I love that one too. Jim, she lives in North Texas. I'm not sure if she's up for a move, but I'm going to reach out to her and ask. I'm going to ask her if she would be up for a move. Dorothy, I'll let her know that she may have stumbled onto something by asking for recommendations. And absolutely, those 64 comments, I haven't had time to read through all of them, but I suspect, Dorothy, that's exactly what happened, was that her community of friends and people who love and care about her and her children did exactly that. So this is an illustration that you can work through when you find yourself in a situation where there are strong emotional reactions. You can walk through these 4 steps, starting with, how does this make me feel? Based on how I feel, what are some management strategies I need to be clear about before I act? What are some social awareness things I need to be aware of? And particularly, do I have empathy? And if not, how do I clear a path to get there? And then finally is the response itself. Now, sometimes we have to do all of those at the same time, because sometimes we find ourselves in situations where it's not a social media post, it is literally happening in the moment. But when you walk through exercises like what we're doing together tonight, what you're doing is building muscle memory. And that muscle memory will serve you well in those moments where you have to respond and react in the moment to whatever is happening around you. If you have these practices built into the system, then you're going to show up and be courageous and confident. Okay, I want to do a couple of things with you before we wrap up our hour together and you get back to the rest of your night. Let's go back to this idea of, as we're building our emotional intelligence, how do we factor that into our purpose, feeling powerful, and expanding on our potential? So I want to encourage you, in the handout, I've given you an activate list that will help you start to answer these questions in meaningful ways. When we leave one another tonight, I won't see you again for another month. So we won't hang out again for a month, right? So what are you going to do in the weeks to come? Are you just going to wait until the next time we're together and we chat? Are you actually going to get to work? Are you going to do this work with intention, with purpose, and with focus? So in your handout, what I did is I just stopped down week by week and said, okay, here's a couple of things that you can do each week between our time together that will build in these EQ muscles, if you will. Think about it as your visit to the gym. And every activity is meant to build muscle. You're toning, you're flexing, you're practicing, you're getting better and better based on your participation in this activation list. And as you're doing it, I want you, leading into that 4th week before we're together again, I want you to stop down and ask, is my purpose being revealed in new ways? Am I learning new things about myself? The more that I do this, am I starting to feel more powerful about my ability to show up with confidence and with courage? I had a moment today, again, a social media moment, where I had shared something on my social media, and I had someone comment and say, why can't you just be positive and optimistic and, count your blessings? And I'm all about those things. I think those things play a very important role in leading a satisfying life. I also think there are moments where it is appropriate for us to pause and to reflect on what's happening in our world. And that's kind of what I did. And my first reaction was, let me tell you what I think about this whole positive count your blessings. I took a deep breath. I worked through the process. I calmed myself before I reacted and responded, because I know how easy it is to get misunderstood on social media. And I don't ever want to offend or hurt or cause more, problems or frustration for anyone else. And so I have to be so thoughtful about my reactions in those moments. And I'm able to do that because I've been practicing this for years and years and years. And it allows me to maintain my integrity when I find I'm in a situation where I feel challenged. So that's your homework. And here's what we're going to do. We've got a few minutes left. And what I thought I'd do in the last 10 minutes or so, and because we're a fairly small group, you can even, Olga, are they able to unmute themselves?
Sorry, I was talking and I had it on mute. I can actually do that for them.
Okay. So if anyone wants to come off mute, you are more than welcome to do that. You can also continue to use the chat. But here's what I wanted to do in the last few minutes, because this is our first official like 1 hour call together. I wanted to give you an opportunity to weigh in on some of the things that you're most interested in learning about in our monthly calls. And hopefully I can line it up with one of the topics that you see here. I'll incorporate it into our conversations. So the way I've laid out our monthly calls, next month we're actually going to do an emotional intelligence assessment. So you'll be doing that in preparation, and then we'll spend our hour actually going through the assessment. We're then going to just walk through each of the 4 areas, starting with self-awareness. I'm going to use one of my favorite exercises, the Johari window. When we get to management, we're going to actually spend 3 weeks on management because I think it's so critical right now, given the conditions that we're all in. We're going to talk about stress, mindfulness, how to lead yourself during times of disruption and uncertainty. When we get to February, we're going to have a conversation about empathy. It'll come up all the time, but that'll be the night that empathy is the leading star. We're going to talk about respect, trust, and integrity, navigating conflict, and then we'll wrap up. And can you even imagine May 20th, 2021? Like I can't even, like that's not even a thing to me, but it says on that slide, May 20th. So I'm imagining that that's a thing that's going to happen in the future. And we're going to wrap up talking about vulnerability. And so every month what we're doing is we're adding to our library, our knowledge and our understanding of emotional intelligence. Okay, so if you want to come off mute, you're more than welcome to. If you have something you want to add or a question that you want to ask now, you are more than welcome to ask any question that you have or add it to the chat. And I'm just going to take a moment and see. Okay, so Patricia, I think I would, and this is for her. Okay, imagine a window in this room, take a moment to breathe and regain the present moment. So she's strong, so help her remember she's strong and she's not alone. So I love that. That's a really beautiful practice. So what are some questions that you have related to emotional intelligence that you would like to explore in the coming months?
If they can just type their, like say, pick me, and then I'll unmute them when I see that. If they can just.
Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's nice, Jim. I agree with you. I really look forward to my time with your district because it's not just Dr. Hernandez, it's your entire leadership team. The level of commitment that they have to this is something special. Not every school district is, while they may be addressing social emotional learning for their students, a lot of school districts are not providing you, faculty and staff, with the training that you need and the space to have these kinds of conversations. Yeah.
So it looks like Miss Marty would like to talk. I'm gonna see if it works here. Oh, there you are. Yeah, she's there. Let's see. I'm gonna unmute her now. Let's see. Miss Marty, if you want to unmute yourself, I just sent you a little link.
Yes. Oh, there we go. I've done it twice now. Okay, so hopefully it worked this time. Hopefully it worked. I wanted to just ditto what you were saying, that a lot of school districts don't do this. I was absolutely blown away at our convocation. I came from another school district this year, and I'm so utterly impressed at the amount of SEL that we are getting and the support that the school district is giving to us. So thank you first for that. But the one thing that I was looking at, something that's been really hard for me lately, is that I am physically in pain with all of the sitting during this distance learning, teaching, remotely. And I'd really like to look at what that does to the psyche. And how, that goes into our emotional intelligence too, and how we perceive the world, and kind of how those all go together.
Yeah, I mean, our bodies are constantly in communication with all of the different internal systems that are running. And so we have a tendency to think that our being is located within our brain. And so we minimize the importance and the impact of all of the other different operating systems within our own bodies. So I will gather, well, I would love to have this conversation. Why don't I'll work it into, let's work it into self-awareness, because this is a self-awareness topic, and talk about that connecting point between emotional intelligence and our environments. You mentioned specifically the sitting all day. I'm curious, just based at this point, have you already started to imagine or even put into practice some ideas that you're experimenting with?
Yes, I've been doing quite a bit of things. Honestly, I've reached out to some teacher groups just to get their ideas as well. But I'm really loving the honestly, the SEL that we're giving the kids in the morning and the afternoons are being great help to me. So thank you. But it's really trying to figure out those times of self-care, really getting the self-care in there so that I can be attuned and be on point when I come to help my students and my families. So there's a lot of different things, you know, yoga, walking, and I'm doing that with my students. But I think just more for the adult side of it. What do we need to do, and what's that connectivity in the brain to the body, the physiological?
Yeah, I love that. I'll add it to my list when we're together next month and doing self-awareness. I think we can do that as a standalone topic. It's a great
Thank you.
one. And then what we can do too, now that you've revealed this, is that those of us that are on the call, it's something I want to tell everyone, turn that into an action item and start paying attention to it. Don't wait until we're together in 30 days to have this conversation. If you already know that this is a challenge that Marta is experiencing, and if you're experiencing it as well, then you guys create conversation with each other. You don't have to wait for us. We don't need a Zoom in order to have this conversation. You can start having this conversation with each other now. And so watch it, see if you can go through the awareness management steps and come up with strategies that you wanted to put into practice and see if it works. And then when we're together next month, you'll be ready to share those as well. I saw a couple others. I know we're getting close to 7:30. So give me a second and I want to address a couple, and then Olga, if you will, just save the chat. Yes. And if you'll send me the chat, that way I can incorporate it into my notes. But as Marta and I were talking, there was a lot of stuff coming in. Okay. Okay, let's see.
Melissa, because she can't unmute herself. Where is she at?
While you unmute Melissa, Dorothy, I want to respond to what you put here. We're going to talk about boundary work. So it will come up in our future conversations. Let me, just so that you're not waiting for 30 days, I will put together some resources that you can go ahead and start looking at as it relates to what you're calling prioritization. You put your family aside to make sure that you have your students covered. And I'll put together a couple of things that can help you to address that. Melissa, the self-management when you feel disrespected, and then overcoming the feelings so you can model fairness and kindness for them in the future. How to model vulnerability with people who are not self-aware. That's a good one. And then they view vulnerability as a weakness. So we're gonna do, and here's the thing, it's like we get 1 hour a month, and so it's hard because it's like, wait until May when we talk about vulnerability. So I'll have an answer for you in 9 months, but you want an answer now. So I'm gonna take 60 seconds and I'm just gonna weigh in on what you've offered. And was it Melissa that was wanting to come off of mute?
No, so she's responding, but she's in a restaurant.
Oh, I got it. You're in a restaurant. Totally get it. Totally get it. So Melissa, as you enjoy your time in the restaurant, I'm going to just give you a little bit of feedback. And here's what I want you to consider and what I want you to think about, okay? Number one, I want you to do some self-reflection on this idea of being disrespected. All right. So I want you to just spend some time thinking about what does that look like and feel like for you. So what are the times where you feel disrespected? And how can you use the purpose, power, potential model to go back to the Justice League, right? And you've got Wonder Woman, and she's got her, bracelets that what could you do to respond and react to moments where you feel disrespected so that you can stay in your own personal power? Okay, so that becomes a homework assignment for you. We won't get all the answers tonight. It's something for you to think about. And then the second thing that I want you to consider is, who do you need to be vulnerable with that views vulnerability as a weakness? Is it required? Is it necessary? Is it something that I need to do? You don't have to be vulnerable with everyone. Let's use the Brene Brown quote. She says, "You only get to hear my story if you have earned the right." Right? You don't get to hear my story unless you've earned the right to hear my story. Now, your answer may be, well, the person I need to be vulnerable with is a family member or someone that I have to see and deal with every single day. But the first question you have to ask is, why do I need to be vulnerable with this person? What does it look like if I'm not vulnerable with this person? And it also goes back to boundary work. So am I willing to institute and draw a boundary in that relationship where it's very superficial and it's just, right, it's just exactly what they need to know in order to move on? Do I have to be vulnerable with that person? And I know we can't answer that question here together, but it gives you something to think about, right? It gives you something to think about. Okay.
There was one question from Dorothy. Maybe
Okay.
for next time. It says, I would like to know how to use EQ and to prioritize. I tend to put my family aside to make sure I have my students covered.
Yeah, so I addressed it a little bit, and my answer is that I'm going to go ahead and put together a couple of things based on our chat. And I think what I'm noticing, and this is what I'm going to incorporate because this is a new endeavor for Edgewood ISD, I think what we're going to do, Olga's going to send me the chat, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start putting together some resources based on the comments that come up in the call, so that you don't have to wait for the month that we address the topic that you have a need on. So Dorothy, I'm going to do some stuff on boundary work that I think will help you move towards the reprioritizing what matters most to you. And we'll address it now versus waiting till later. But I still want you to come and hang out with me. So when we're together for these monthly 1-hour calls, keep coming back because it's riding the bike. We're riding the bike for an hour every month. And the more that we ride the bike, we get better at it. You start out on a tricycle, you get a bike with training wheels, you move to a regular bike, you get a 10-speed, and before you know it, you're doing a unicycle down Main Street, right? So we're riding the bike together once a month for 1 hour. So keep coming back so that we can continue to dig into these things. I'm going to let that be the period at the end of the sentence. I'm going to wrap up and hand it back to Olga. I'm so glad that you came and hung out with me for this hour. I know that your time is valuable, and I appreciate that you would take time in your week to spend this hour with me. So have a wonderful rest of the week.
Thank you so much, Miss Libby. We really appreciate this. And to everybody that's on, what I want to say is that if you have a coworker that may be struggling with some of these, please let them know what you gained out of this session. We're going to have several more. I really think that us taking time out of our day, I know it's late in the evening. I can hear my kids, yelling in the other room, but I really think that this overall will help us, especially during this time that we're having. And this is something we can use later on. So if you have a coworker that may be struggling with some of these issues that we discussed today, let them know, hey, you know what? Go back and watch the video, look at what was asked, and then come to the next session. I will be sending out the dates of those sessions on the email once I provide this video a link for everyone. But I really want to say thank you again for being here, Miss Libby. You are amazing, and we are so lucky, and I can't wait to see you next month. And anything that does send worksheets or anything like that, I will be sending out to all of you all. So again, share the information, share the message, tell them we're going to be sending out the link. That way they can see and hear and get the help or assurance that you need. So I'm going to leave the chat box up for a few seconds. So if you had any questions, that way Miss Libby will get a copy of this chat. If you had any questions that you want to put on here, please type them in. I'll leave it up for a couple more minutes before we exit out. So Miss Libby, would you like me to play some more 80s music for you?
That would be awesome. We can wrap it up with some 80s music. And Marta, to answer your question, no, I got off Twitter 3 years ago because it's not a place that's good for my mental health. But if you want to hang out with me, the best place is to go to Instagram, and it's Libby Bravo CC. So if you'll just go to Instagram, type in Libby Bravo CC, you can follow me there. I find Instagram to be a much happier place